Okay, so I'm Chris. I'm a final year PhD student working in the field of security. And today I will present you a method for validating proximity through a technique called backscattering modulation. To do so, I'll split the presentation into 4 parts, starting with the motivation part. Why do we need to validate proximity? Needless to say, short-range communication systems have become an essential part of everyday life. Contactless payments, key fobs, e-passports, there are so many examples. Along with the new technology came distance fraud too. As many may think, the physical constraints of a short-range communication channel does not implicitly prove the proximity of a device. This graph plots the number of news titles related to distance fraud over the years. In a distance fraud, the verifying device is deceived to believe that the valid device, such as a valid card or a key fob, is closer than it is in reality. A naive method is to estimate the distance based on the received signal strength of the transmitting device. Well, for some applications where there is no distance fraud, this method works fine and it is very easy to implement. For example, NHS app uses it to notify people that have been close to COVID-19 carriers. But it doesn't work well against distance fraud. Transmitter may shorten their distance by simply increasing the transmit power. The most reliable method is based on time. BMW, for example, has recently employed this method for keyless entry systems of their cars. But specialized hardware and a large bandwidth are required, which may be limiting factors for some applications. Now, we're moving to some background information that will help us understand the suggested scheme. So RFID stands for Radio Frequency Identification. RFID systems comprise the reader and the tag. The tag is often a device with no local power that is used for identification purposes. With no local power, communication between the tag and the reader is possible through a technique called backscattering modulation. There are 2 types of backscattering, and our scheme requires radiated backscattering. In radiated backscattering, the energy required for transmitting the data is provided by the reader, as shown at the top left. The tag antenna is not a typical radio transmitter in the sense that it does not transmit its own electromagnetic wave. It uses the wave provided by the reader and sends its digital data by opening or closing its circuit. For example, to send 1, the tag closes its circuit and the reader signal is reflected back to the reader. To send 0, the circuit closes, in which case there is no backscatter wave. I'd also like to talk about some basics of channels. Here we've got a transmitter on the left and a receiver on the right. As the signal travels through the physical medium, it gets attenuated, delayed, reflected, diffracted. Different copies arrive at the receiver. It is a complicated process, and it is easier to think the channel as a black box. A transmitter transmits a sine wave, that's the input. The sound wave passes through the channel, and this is an example of what the output looks like. It's a distorted signal, and this is what the receiver sees. Mathematically, the channel is seen as a function, typically denoted by h. The receiver is able to track the outputs of this function over time. Now, we bring a second receiver to the scene. When the receiver is close to the first receiver, they shall observe similar channel outputs. That's because the multipath signal will arrive to the 2 receivers via similar routes. To distinguish between the 2 channels, we use notations H1 and H2. Here is an example of the correlation between the 2 channels against the distance. So let's put everything together now and present the scheme. So for the proposed method, a helper node is employed who transmits an unmodulated signal. The 2 channels, H1 and H2, will be highly correlated so the tag is close to the reader. Differently to typical RFID communications, the tag uses the backscatter modulation of the helper signal, not the reader's, and sends data to the reader by the method that we discussed earlier, by backscatter modulation. Now, using signal processing techniques, the reader is able to track not only his own channel, but the channel H2 as well, since the information of H2 is captured to the signal reflected towards the reader. And the suggested method can be applied in narrowband communications and can be implemented seamlessly by RFID tags. So for more details, you may have a look at the paper titled A Lightweight Protocol for Validating Proximity in ultra-high frequency RFID systems. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any questions.